Welcome to the Jeremy and Andy Talk Movies podcast. I am Jeremy,
I'm Andy.
and today we are going back to the year 1999 once again to visit.
Once again, I'm loving 1999.
Yeah, to visit two movies celebrating their 25th anniversary. And this week, once again, Andy chose a movie that I had never seen before, and I was pretty excited
I,
to get to experience a first time watch. And that's
yeah.
that's the movie I think that we'll jump into first.
Okay.
We'll go with that.
Well done.
Uh,
Job well done.
because the movie is Go. And
Yeah.
Andy, you introduced this movie as when we talked about it last week. You said there were a lot of movies that were trying to duplicate what Pulp Fiction did.
Yes.
And watching this movie, I think, a fairly good idea, exactly what you meant by that. But just
Yeah.
for the sake of our audiences, do you want to elaborate a little bit on the Pulp Fiction influence that led to this movie?
Sure, I'd be glad to. So yeah, that's why I picked this movie. So in 90, well, I'll back up just a little bit. In 92, Tarantino comes out with Reservoir Dogs. And it later became this really kind of beloved hit, but when it came out, I think it made like literally like $2 million at the box office. So it kind of made a belated splash. Pulp Fiction comes out, and it's almost instantly this pulp culture phenomenon. And when I talk about how Go and many, many other movies ripped off Pulp Fiction, what I mean by that is a lot of things, just that Tarantino style, the nonlinear storytelling, the um, the world of drugs and violence and that kind of stuff, but more than anything, the dialogue. And Tarantino, and I've talked about this on here before, Tarantino, I don't know if he invented it, but he certainly brought it to the forefront, mastered this idea of just this razor sharp, snappy dialogue and characters kind of talking, about stuff that really had nothing to do with the movie, and pulp culture references in movies. And, all this stuff may not sound that innovative to anybody listening, but back in 1994, it was mind blowing. I mean, I've talked about it on here before. Like, I remember watching, Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction, kind of around the same time, and it was like, I didn't even know you could do that. Like, it just opened up this door that you didn't even know was there. Like I said, just the razor sharp dialogue and the talking about stuff other than what's going on in the movie and referencing other movies. And they the characters talk about music, or they kind of go off on these rants and these sidetracks and all these different things. And so after Pulp Fiction, becomes this phenomenon and wins Oscars, it gets nominated for Oscars and all the things, you just get this slew of, I mean, just ripoffs, quite frankly. And some good, some bad, some in between. And um, it's funny to think that this was still, in 1999, we still were on kind of the Tarantino Pulp Fiction high, where it just seemed like that was just the coolest thing ever, and Tarantino was the coolest guy ever. And I just remember literally, like, my friends and I, like, talking like we were characters in Tarantino movies, like we were just trying to do that thing where we were just having these super random conversations, or you'd focus on some like old relic of the past and just have this conversation about it. So it was just very much a thing. And so Go comes out in 1999, and it wasn't like, obviously, like, in the marketing they weren't saying like, well, this is a Pulp Fiction ripoff, but if you knew your movies, you could tell. I remember from the advertising that that's what it was, and it had a cool young 1999 cast in it. So I was all in, and I was there like opening weekend to see this movie. So that's what I mean when I say Tarantino ripoff.
It definitely reminds me of the Die Hard like correlation. So Die Hard comes out
Uh
in
huh.
'88, and for years there's a run of action movies that are essentially Die Hard in a new setting. Speed is Die Hard on a
Yep.
bus. Under Siege is Die Hard on a boat. And just so on and so forth. And you're right. Pulp Fiction comes out, and then there's this whole run of whatever genre you want to call what that is, but a movie's
Just like the Tarantino
trying
genre.
to ape that. And yeah, you're exactly right. The non-linear is obviously like a dead giveaway that they're trying to do the Pulp Fiction type thing. So just
Hmm.
quickly for those who haven't seen this movie, Go is a movie told in basically three parts. So
Hmm.
the movie starts like a normal movie. It's telling a story, and the lead character, played by Sarah Polley, her name is Runa, I think, and,
I think, yeah,
and
I think so.
she's she goes through her I can't say words, her whole ordeal, and then when it
Hmm.
gets to the end of her ordeal, it resets and tells the
Yep.
story starting at the same point from another person's perspective, and the adventure
Their
they go on,
perspective.
and then it goes back and does a third perspective from two other characters, and so that's really the non-linear part we're talking about, is how it retells the story and recontextualizes certain parts of it as you go back and see the other characters' perspectives. Um,
Right.
and like I said, it's all about sale of drugs and people just trying to have a good time or trying to get out
Yeah.
of trouble when they get themselves in trouble. It's
Yeah.
a lot of bad decision making
It
that
is.
fuels a lot of this movie. And Go is an appropriate title because essentially the movie is just like it's a movie that just keeps moving, um,
Yeah.
and really has a tremendous pace. I was really shocked looking up the Rotten Tomatoes scores for this movie
Yeah.
because critics loved this movie. It got
They
a
did.
91% on Rotten Tomatoes, and I thought
I
I just wrote
know.
a note next to it. I said, "Whoa!" Like
Yeah.
I I
I had no idea.
it struck me as the type of movie that's like, oh well, critics aren't going to love this, and critics are going to think exactly
Hmm.
what you said. Well, here's another Pulp Fiction type movie, so I couldn't believe that it was as well received as it was in the
Yeah.
time.
I know, it was crazy. I didn't remember it that way at all. I remembered it. What I remembered from it, is just that it kind of just did not light the box office. I mean, what was the box office, like 25 million or
So
something?
it grossed 28.4 million on a $20 million budget.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I remember about it, where it just didn't land. And then going back this week and watching it and then doing the research, it was like, oh my gosh, critics love this movie. And then it talked a lot about how, it's kind of, it does have legs, basically. Like it's kind of carried on, and it's looked on, fondly now by people. So I was pleasantly surprised to see that.
Yeah. So the movie was directed by Doug Liman, and I feel like there could be
Crazy,
a
right?
really interesting discussion could be had about Doug Liman because he's had one of the strangest careers that I could think
He
of when you
has.
look at his IMDb. Like, he really hasn't made a ton of movies for as long as he's been working, and
Hmm.
he's made some really good movies. He's made some not so good movies, but something about his movies, like they're always a little different. Like he
They are.
doesn't make really like standard movies, even when he makes really good
Right.
movies. So his breakout movie basically was Swingers,
Yep.
which was also John Favreau's breakout and Vince
It
Vaughn's
was.
breakout.
Yeah.
Um, I'm just going to run through some of the movies that he made. So he made Swingers in '96. Didn't make another movie until he made Go in '99. His next one was The Bourne Identity, which is a
It's
complete tonal
wild.
shift in 2002. That's what I mean by like just a
Crazy.
weird IMDb. Swingers,
Yeah.
Go, Bourne Identity are three really different movies. He goes on to do Mr.
It
and Mrs.
is.
Smith, Jumper, and so you're like, okay, he's kind of got this like almost B movie action movie that just doesn't take itself too seriously though. It kind of knows it's goofy and fun.
Hmm.
Um, he does Edge of Tomorrow in 2014, which is
Yeah.
we've talked about it before, just a really surprise hit.
Yep. Really good
Great
movie.
fun cruise movie. Uh,
Yep.
and then he has kind of a run of not so successful movies. He does The Wall. He does American Made back with Cruise again, which I actually enjoyed,
Cruise.
but
Yeah.
wasn't a hit. Locked Down,
Right.
Chaos Walking, and then this year did Roadhouse, and he's got another one coming out this fall called The Instigators with Matt Damon and Casey Affleck. So we'll see how that does. But just a
Yes.
very
We'll
strange
see.
career.
It is. And I think the wildest thing is just, so like Swingers is like the ultimate like low budget independent kind of gritty, like just shoot on the fly type situation. And then, you know, that's what'd you say, 96, right?
Yes.
And then by '02 and only one movie later, he's got the Bourne movie. it seems like a big leap and a just a strange leap to go from this, super independent type stuff he was doing, and then he gets the Bourne franchise. But, you know, big hit, the Bourne movies, and really popular and well liked. So I guess it worked out for him. But it's a strange leap.
Yeah, and if you ask me like to describe his directing style, I couldn't do it because the movies are just so
No,
different. I would be like,
yeah,
I won't know how to describe Doug Lyman's just directing style other than he just kind of does his own thing, whatever he's feeling at the time, I guess.
yeah. He doesn't have like one thing he seems to stick to over and over again.
Yeah. Um, the movie is written by John August. That's another guy with a really weird IMDb
Really weird.
because nothing else that he's written is anything like Go.
No,
It's like he did his one shot at like I'm going to do something Tarantino esque, and then just I mean
and he didn't
I'm
stay in
going to
there.
run through some of his movies just because it's a bizarre list for the same person to have written. Titan AE the next year, 2000, did Charlie's Angels that same year. Charlie's Angels Full Throttle in '03.
Dude,
Big Fish, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Corpse Bride, The Nines, Dark Shadows, Frankenweenie, and the Aladdin remake, the live action Aladdin.
that's
You
crazy.
would never watch Go and be like, you would never predict in a million years that'd be the guy's career going forward.
No, not at all. I mean, those are some high profile movies, but
Yeah,
they have no there's no connections there
yeah.
between them other than he was sticking with Tim
I
Burton
about to say
movies for
that's
a
what you
little
say. A
bit.
lot of Tim Burton is what I'm getting out of that,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
just yeah. So as we're talking about this movie, like it's a movie again that's aping Pulp Fiction by a director who doesn't really have this distinct style and does a lot of different things, by a writer who doesn't write anything else like it again. It's just a strange concoction
It's
of
a
a movie.
strange. It is.
Uh,
It is, and
yeah,
it's kind of strange too. Like Pulp Fiction ripoff, like we keep talking about, but 5 years after Pulp Fiction. So this movie almost would have made more sense to me if it had come out in '95 or '96, and it was just truly just coming right off of the heels of Pulp Fiction. But I don't know.
it is definitely a very 90s movie as far as the
It is
aesthetic,
so
the
'90s.
music, just everything about it. You watch it and go, oh my gosh, this is a time capsule of a movie. My first note, too, was that this movie is proof that cocaine movies still existed in the late 90s. As Bill Simmons always talks
Yes.
about how much the cocaine affected the 80s. I watched this movie and I was like, maybe it's not exactly cocaine. I don't know. It's probably other drugs, but I watched this movie and I said the people making this had to be doing the drugs that are being portrayed in this movie because it is a wild, weird movie.
It is. It's either, Bill Simmons has two theories. One is like in the '80s, it was the cocaine that was taken over. And then his theory is that in the '90s, it was the come down off of cocaine that was leading to some of this crazy stuff. So I think you're right. I think the theory that like they were just taking the same drugs as the characters in this movie seems to be accurate.
Yeah. So uh, I read in the trivia that originally this was intended to be just a short film that was only
Oh,
following the first act of the movie, only following
yes.
the Sarah Polly character, which I thought when I heard that, I was like, that kind of makes sense because, in my opinion, I think that's the strongest act of the movie.
Hmm.
Not saying the other
Hmm.
ones aren't good or don't have their good qualities about them, but I after watching, I was like, I was really in on that first act. In the second act, not as
Yep.
much. In the third act, even probably just got a little less each time. And I thought,
Yeah.
yeah, it makes sense that it was originally like just that first part. I thought that was the
Yeah.
best section of the movie.
Yeah. Yep.
Um, so talking just a little bit about the story, I loved and I'm kind of skipping ahead to the end of that first section. I love just the character Ruta, who's kind of street smart, and she isn't in that criminal world, but she sees an opportunity to make some money. She's going to
She's
get evicted, so she decides she's going to sell drugs, and uh, when she ends up even more in the hole because she figures out that she's being entrapped by cops, and
yes.
so she has to ditch the drugs, and she's out the money she spent on the drugs, and so
Hmm.
her solution is to steal just regular like allergy medicine and stuff and replace it to give it back to the
Yeah.
drug dealer. But then she goes to this rave and starts selling it to dumb teenagers, and that to me was my favorite part of the movie was the scenes of
Yes.
her like tricking these dumb teenagers, and they're so like determined to be cool that they're like
Yeah.
describing that they're getting high off this allergy medicine, and
Yeah.
it's
It
hysterical.
it works really well. Yeah, it works really well even now.
Yeah. Um, and I don't know what it is like about raves. I've never been to a rave. I don't mean to judge people who go to raves.
Same.
They just don't strike me as the smartest people. And so when it's making fun of them,
That's
it's
great.
very fun to be in on that joke and like, yeah, people are dumb.
They're easy targets.
Yeah.
They are. And Sarah Polley is so good at this like she portrays like that street smart so well in this movie. So you're like, yeah, she does definitely seem, several intelligence levels above these people. So she probably could pull this off. She does a really good job.
She does. And I was surprised. I was looking at her IMDb, and she's transitioned within the last like decade and a half or so from being an actress to being a director.
Yes.
But she's got a really extensive resume of acting on IMDb. But I read through the whole
Yeah.
thing and I realized that Go was actually the first movie of hers that I've seen. Because she's
Yeah.
done mostly kind of obscure stuff, done some TV, a lot of like kind of B movies and stuff. So I was like, she
I
seemed
know.
familiar, but I was like, I don't really know what else from. And I looked, I was like, I've not seen her in anything. Go was actually the first movie of hers that I've seen, but she was really good. And I get why her career's been so long. And of course, like I said, she's transitioned now to directing. She directed the movie Women
Yeah.
Talking, which was an Oscar nominee.
Yeah.
It just was it
Yep.
a year ago. Um,
I think it was,
so she's got obviously real talents there as well. But um,
she's really
yeah,
good in Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead remake.
which I've actually not seen, but I've heard really good things about.
She's really good in that. Yeah, it's pretty good, and she's really good in it. So, yeah, I kind of wish she would have. I don't want to say like done more mainstream stuff, but I wish she hadn't had such a desire to do such like obscure, out there stuff.
Yeah.
Because I mean, she leaps off the screen in this movie.
Yeah, she's got the talent for sure.
Yeah,
Let's go ahead and talk. You mentioned it. It had like this real up and coming cast for 99.
yeah.
Like a big
Oh
cast
yeah.
and a lot of names. What really struck me though, I made it a note of it. I said, like a huge cast of up and comers. Not a whole lot of people who really made it though. Like
Yeah.
it's sort of a time
Uh,
capsule. Like if you showed somebody this movie, they'd be like, I don't know who these people are. I'd be like, if you were around in '99, you'd be like
they
that
were.
guy, them, and them. But
Mhm.
nowadays, if you showed people this movie, I'm like, the two who I wrote down, I guess, made it were Timothy Oliphant and William
Mhm.
Fichtner.
Yeah.
And not that Fichtner's a huge star, but he's continued to work and be in big
He's
things.
recognizable.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And I'm going like, man, just the list of names of people who were up and comers. Obviously we already talked about Sarah Polley, but then you got Jay Moore, Scott Wolf, Tay Diggs, Katie Holmes.
Katie Holmes is the big one, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Who probably ended up
Like it just seemed like she was going to be huge.
right. It was like almost shocking that she was just a supporting role in this movie because she was such a rising
Mhm.
star. She did probably her biggest movie is Batman Begins. Looking
Yeah.
back, and then she was married to Tom Cruise, and it was really weird, and kind of became like
Yeah.
notorious for that.
It kind of feels like in a lot of ways her career never recovered from all that. Like all the Tom Cruise marriage and how weird that was and him jumping on the couch. Like it feels like it hurt her more than it hurt him.
Yeah, because I think
Yeah.
everybody's kind of just understood like, well, Tom's a weirdo, but like we didn't know,
She
she's
kind of got drugged
she's a
into,
weirdo, I guess, by association.
I guess so. I know you're a huge Dawson's Creek guy. I know that's your favorite show and you watch it all the time.
My favorite show that I've never seen an episode of course, yes.
Yeah. But tell you what though, in the 90s Dawson's Creek was a thing. Like I didn't watch it, but I most certainly knew what it was and knew about it. So yeah,
Yeah, everybody
you
knew
would
the
have
theme
thought
song.
like, yep, absolutely they did. Absolutely.
Um,
But and
yeah,
you know what? I don't know if you're going to get into this, but like I think she does a good job in this movie.
yeah, I think she's got some talent. I mean,
Like
like, it's not without merit
I
that she was an up and comer.
no, it's definitely not. Like she's definitely got some of that Tarantino ripoff dialogue that she has to deliver with her and Oliphant together in the restaurant, and like, yeah, I think she does it well.
I mean, it kind of harkens back to our Varsity Blues discussion of James Vanderbeek, where we're like, we know he's kind of a joke, but actually, like, this guy's got some real
Like that's not
chops.
bad. I
Yeah,
know. I know. Like, in a way, I kind of feel sorry for some of these people that just kind of maybe unfairly get, I don't know if like made fun of is the right word, but like kind of become the butt of some of these jokes. And then like, yeah, just like when we watched Varsity Blues, like I even said that I was like, man, I was ready to come in here and just make fun of Vanderbeek, but he's actually pretty good in this movie. And Katie Holmes is just fine in this movie.
yeah. It's probably they're probably just victims of a reputation blowing up too big, too fast, and then being held to a
Yeah.
standard that's not fair. Because as we're looking
Yeah.
back on it, we're going like, oh, they're failed, you know, teen stars. They must not be very good. And then we watch them go, oh, they're actually pretty good.
But
But
they're not bad at
because our
all.
expectations now are lowered. But when they started to blow up, it
Yeah.
was like, well, are they going to be the next big thing for real? And then you start comparing
Hmm.
them to the actual other movie stars of the time and going, well, they're not them or they're not, and then it's
Hmm.
victims of that level of expectation.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
A couple of other, just noticeable names with small parts in the movie: Breckin Meyer and James Duvall as the
Yes. Yep.
the goofball friends in the second act. And
Is there a better person to play a goofball friend than Breckenmeyer?
probably not. And James
Yeah.
Duvall, who to me, like every time I see him, I just go, James Duvall is the test case for what Keanu Reeves' career would have been 99 out of 100 times. Just showing what a
Right.
surprise Keanu Reeves' success is,
Keanu Reeves
because James
is. Yeah.
Duvall just has everything about like the Bill and Ted Keanu Reeves
Yeah.
vibe, but he never,
Hmm.
like, if Keanu never moved on from that, that's James Duvall.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yep. Also, Melissa McCarthy's first
yeah,
movie
her first movie
appearance. Yeah.
appearance. Yeah, that was kind of surprising when I saw her pop up. So
I had honestly completely forgotten she was in this movie. So,
yeah, the guy who has one of the top roles in the movie, a guy who plays Simon in it, is a guy I've never seen
yeah.
before and don't know if I've seen since. He's
No.
played by a guy named Desmond Askew, and
Yeah.
yeah, I have no idea. But
No.
pretty meaty part in this movie, pretty unlikable character.
He is. Yes, he is. You really want to see that guy just get punched in the face repeatedly.
Yeah, honestly, like as you're watching it, you're going, man, why is Tay Diggs friends with these people who are just
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
worst?
For sure. For sure. For sure.
Because so much, like I said, it's a lot of like bad decisions. When I said that, it's like almost exclusively attributed to the Simon
Him.
character, who just bad decision after
Yeah.
bad decision after bad decision. It just makes things happen, and I guess wildly entertaining, but it just, man, it's frustrating to watch as a viewer, where you're just like,
It does get a little
somebody
frustrating. Yeah.
just, yeah, just get this guy, let him go ahead and get his comeuppance.
Yeah. Let's just see it.
Yeah.
For sure. Okay. So, did you like this movie?
Um. Yes, I enjoyed this movie,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a strange kind of enjoyment.
It is. It's a strange movie.
Yeah. It
So, like, when
I was just gonna
no,
say,
go ahead.
it is one, like, I watched this Friday night, and I was almost tempted just to watch it again Saturday, because it's like, it's a lot to process, and I
It's a
didn't end up
lot.
doing
It's a
that. But
lot.
I was just like, I thought about it a lot, just because, yeah, just trying to unfold what all you just witnessed. And like I said,
Hmm.
I really enjoyed the first act, enjoyed everything with the Sarah Polly character. Didn't enjoy I, it's entertaining, but was frustrating with the Simon character. And then you go to the two guys played by Jay Moore and Scott Wolf, and that one is just, I don't know, bonkers. I don't know another word for it.
By the time you get to William Fichtner standing naked in that room, but I'm going to tell you what, I remember in 1999, I remember just the shock of them coming out there and William Fichtner standing there naked, and what a laugh. That got a huge laugh in the moment. And honestly, it made me laugh again this time watching it.
Yeah, I was like, it's really funny, the misdirection that they do, where
It
it,
is
it's leaning so hard. It actually leans. I wrote it leaning too hard into the misdirection, because
too hard.
because
It does.
as soon as you start thinking back on it, you're like, it doesn't make any sense. It was so leaning hard into we're creepy swingers, basically, who want to like have you guys over this, and then they bait and switch you and do, they're in some sort of multi-level marketing thing and they want to be part of their marketing team and sell products for
It
them. It's hilarious. Like I did laugh at that.
the gag is funny, but you're right. They lean so hard into like trying to swerve you. And that's where it's like that's where you realize like how good Tarantino is, that he can pull this stuff off and it doesn't feel near as forced as it does in this movie. Which I will say, like, I did enjoy rewatching. But what do you think about like how much it rips off, and what do you think about that? Like, was that distracting you, like the Tarantino rip off stuff?
Uh, it wasn't too distracting. I definitely thought about it several times throughout the movie,
Mm-hmm.
um, and it probably doesn't help. Like obviously, like that was put in my head before I even started watching it. I think I probably would have made those connections
Yeah.
anyways. But as it was happening, it's like, yep, here it is.
Yeah.
Here it is. This is what Andy's talking about when he says this is
Yeah.
a Pulp Fiction style movie. And um, you know, I'm sure you're not the first person to say it about this movie, but
No,
it's
it's not an original thought on my
yeah.
part.
So
But
what I mean is like I think a lot of people would see this and draw the same conclusion. So I probably would have too. But
sometimes it didn't bother me at all. Like, I don't really mind that they ripped off kind of that style or the nonlinear or the go backwards and see something from a different point of view. That didn't bother me. The time, I don't know why it grated on my nerves the most, is when Katie Holmes and Oliphant are together in that restaurant and he goes on that little side rant about the Family Circle cartoon
mm-hmm.
in the newspaper. That, I was like, why did you guys do this? That is so clear. I mean, I'm surprised they didn't have to pay Tarantino some kind of royalty for that. That is such a Tarantino thing, for just like I was talking about at the beginning, for a character to kind of go off on a side rant about some really random thing. And that was kind of stuff like that where I just be like, oh my gosh, this is such a blatant ripoff.
there was there was definitely moments where I thought they're trying a little too hard to be clever. And that's a lot
Yes.
of the movie. The whole movie is sort of a gimmick, just showing how clever we can be. Like, look at how we weave
How
these things
clever we can be.
together, and like, yeah, those scenes of dialogue where they're trying to be really clever. Not just his part that you're talking about, but then Katie Holmes doing the whole "What's your favorite part about Christmas?" Mine's the present and the surprise. Like all of that was like,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah, she has that
not
whole speech
not
about
great
Christmas
dialogue.
presents, and
Yeah,
it wasn't. But that's what I mean too. Like when I talk about Katie Holmes not being bad, it's like it's not her fault. You
no,
know, it's like she does her best with it. But yeah, it's very, very heavy on the Tarantino stuff.
yeah. Um, and then I wrote this note about the Jay Moore and Scott Wolf characters because in 1999 making those two be gay in a gay relationship, I was like,
Hmm.
I bet you for 1999 just doing that was like a shock factor that
Hmm.
isn't so much now in movies, and so it probably, I don't know. I just thought, I bet in 1999 that felt like a lot more pushing the envelope, having these two characters be like that, and that was probably a bigger surprise than now.
For sure, for sure. Because both of those guys, I think too, they were purposely. I think they purposely probably cast them to kind of play against type, where they both at some point in their careers kind of had that, like, these are like the hot, you know, guys who could get any women and stuff, and the up and like Scott Wolf was in what, like Party of Five or something,
Yeah,
and
something
so
like
he was
that.
kind of like one of those teen
Heartthrobs,
idols.
yeah,
Oh, heart throbs. That's what I'm trying to say. And so then I think they purposely cast him to try to, kind of like with that swerve.
yeah. And I did read that Jay Moore really wanted the Timothy Oliphant part, uh,
Hmm.
and I could see why. I thought Oliphant had the most interesting part. And part of that's just I think Timothy Oliphant's a really interesting actor. Like
I
he's
like
always
him. I
compelling on
like
screen.
him.
And when he showed up, I was like, oh sweet, like Oliphant's
Yeah.
in this, and
And I think he's really good in this
he
movie.
is.
It's one thing I was thinking rewatching this. It was like he really pulls off, like, I thought they did a really good job. It was really effective. Like when he's coming after them, when he realizes the scam they pulled on him, he pulls off, like, you're kind of scared of this dude, like, because he kind of gives off that crazy a little bit. And then it's amazing how easily he is able to switch. Like all of us, it's like he's this super scary dude who's going to fly off the handle and he's chasing these moron kids. And then the next thing you know it, he's kind of got this great almost weirdly charming chemistry with Katie Holmes, and Oliphant does a great job of balancing those two things.
You're absolutely right. He's done it a
Yeah,
lot. He's tapped into a lot of his career where he can toe that line between charming and menacing, um,
yep.
very well.
He does a really good job in this movie. I think I definitely agree with you where it's like looking backwards. I think I would have been just more interested in a story with the Sarah Polly character and the Timothy Oliphant character and some of the background players and stuff. I didn't. They just got too in love with the idea of how clever they were being because I think the real meat of that story is just the Sarah Polly and Timothy Oliphant stuff, and then and the Katie Holmes stuff. Keep that. That's fine with me. But that's where the good stuff is.
Yeah, and yeah, the desire to have everything overlap. So one of one of my biggest chuckles in the movie was the first time you're going through the story when Oliphant finally confronts uh, Polly in the parking lot at night outside the rave, and it looks like she's cornered and he's going to shoot her, and then the car flies out of nowhere and hits her. But then the way the car just backs up, speeds up to the cliff, and just stops and throws her off, and then speeds
Yeah,
away. While Oliphant's like,
yeah.
"What are
That's
you doing?" I was dying laughing that was that like car's
it's
response.
funny.
And it actually was disappointing when they came back and like showed, oh look, it's going to be characters from this other storyline,
Yeah.
and then their response to
Hmm.
it and all. I was like, it took away a lot of the humor of the initial thing happening, where it's just totally random and
It is, and
the response.
that's another Tarantino ripoff is to try and use like these sudden these sudden moments of violence almost for comedy. That's another Tarantino thing, like, oh, I shot Marvin in the face from Pulp Fiction,
Yeah,
so they're ripping that off too. But it does. This was such a funny experience to rewatch because it's like on one hand you're so aware of what a ripoff it is, but I'm also going, you know what though, it's funny, like it's working for the most part.
yeah, and just like with Die Hard, there's ones that work, there's ripoffs that capture some of that element, and there's ones that don't.
Yep, exactly right.
Yeah. So overall, I'm glad that you picked this movie. I'm glad that I went and
It
watched
was
it
fun to
and visited
revisit.
this 1999 time capsule again, especially with the cast. The cast is
Oh
such
yeah.
a throwback. The music too, I should say. I mean, just the fact that there's even that like the guy who takes the drugs and then they go in the grocery store and he has the whole hallucination. That's the word. Where
Hallucination,
he's
there it is.
dancing with the checkout clerk lady, and it's all to the
Oh yeah.
Macarena. Like that is just. I was like, wow, that's
So
very
1999.
90s. Yeah,
It is. So yeah, it was a funny. I mean, it's a flawed movie, but it's still a lot of fun. It still holds up well. Like I said, little nitpicks, and like you said, the first act definitely being the most interesting. But I definitely did not regret going back and watching this. And I'm going to tell you, in 1999, at the time, my friends and I went to see this. We loved this movie.
yeah, I could totally see that.
Yep.
All right, we're gonna move on now from that movie to the movie that I picked for this week or this month, I
Hmm.
should say, which is another really flawed movie,
Hmm.
and it's The 13th Warrior.
Yeah.
So, The 13th Warrior, just to set it up a little bit, it's based on a book by Michael Crichton,
Yes.
and Michael Crichton took the story of Beowulf essentially and kind of rewrote it as though it were um, more of a real story. So kind of like the movie
Hmm.
Troy did with I think it's the Iliad, where it takes the story of
Right.
Helen of Troy and all that, and it takes out all the elements of like actual gods and supernatural stuff, and just tells it like, what if it was just a real human story?
Yep.
That's what Crichton did with Beowulf, and changes it from it being this creature to being these just sort of savage, like descendants of Neanderthal people that attack these Viking villages essentially, and
Yes.
then yeah, these people that fight back. So based on this book, but it is a movie that was a box office disaster because not
Yes.
only was it the budget was hugely inflated because of all sorts of issues with filming and because of reshoots and all sorts of things. So it became a $160 million movie that made 61.7 total gross. So huge bomb. Critics really didn't like it. Got a 33%
No.
from critics on Rotten Tomatoes, which is brutal. So
Yeah.
this movie was
That's
just a
brutal.
movie that just really took a
It just
pounding
missed.
when it came out.
It did. I saw online, I was reading online researching this week. It was the biggest box office failure of 1999. It lost the most money of any movie in 1999.
Which, yeah, I mean, losing 100 million doesn't surprise me.
Yeah,
That's a big
yeah.
loss.
And so unfortunate for this movie. I did not realize this till this week. It opened the same weekend as The Sixth Sense.
Yeah, that's brutal.
And just it's you know, and it's like you can't fault this movie. Nobody saw the success of The Sixth Sense coming.
No.
And so it already had a slew of problems and things going against it. And then Sixth Sense becomes this phenomenon that just makes $1 trillion and just further, helped kind of bury this movie and make this movie just kind of forgotten.
Yeah. And, as we talked about with the budget being so big, this was never a movie that should have been a $160 million movie. Like, I don't think it was ever a movie that was
Oh
being counted
no.
on to be that big of a hit. Like, it was just all the troubles of production. Kind of like, say, Waterworld, for example, which Waterworld
Yeah.
became more famous for the troubled production and how that budget ballooned out of control. And so it became a
Yes.
big loss. That's sort of the story of this one, too. It was never expected to be a huge movie. It was, I mean, it's a almost Conan the Barbarian style movie starring Antonio
Hmm.
Banderas, who was a star but not like a huge box office draw at the time.
Right.
So
Yep.
putting this movie out again against something like The Sixth Sense, needing to make as much money as it needed to just to break
It was
even,
it was just never gonna happen.
yeah, set up for failure.
It was. This movie was doomed from the get-go.
Yep. So let's talk a little bit about that production or the production issues that have become notorious. So John McTiernan, I said previewing this movie from a legendary action director, John
Yeah.
McTiernan, who is a legendary action director for no other reason than in back-to-back years he did Predator and Die Hard, two of the
Dude,
all-time action movies.
that's just one of the coolest things you could ever brag about.
Yeah, and that's certainly the highlight of his profile. He's actually doesn't have like the most extensive IMDb. He did The
No.
Hunt for the Red October, which was another action hit. Um,
Yeah, and people really like
yeah,
that movie.
he did do Die Hard with a Vengeance. But he kind of went out with a bit of a whimper. His last two movies were Rollerball and Basic, and
Yeah,
then he
it's too bad.
hasn't directed a movie since 2003, mainly because he got into some legal trouble, and I think even did some time in prison. So McTiernan's
It's
career
unfortunate.
just fell apart, and this was one of the last movies that he did, one of the last 3 or 4 movies that he did, and they ended up having to come back and reshoot a lot of it. Michael Crichton, the author, ended up coming back and basically being like a secondary director and reshooting a lot of things.
Yeah,
You can tell watching this movie, it feels like a very pieced together movie.
it does. Big time.
Like it's almost hard to believe that they shot a movie and then did reshoots to fill in gaps because it feels like a movie that only got like half of it shot is what it feels like.
Hmm.
It feels like a lot of
Yeah.
stuff missing. Um, so, I mean, like we said, doomed from the beginning because this movie was all sorts of trouble. Now, all of that being said about how much this movie struggled just getting put together, how much it was set up for failure, all of the issues with it, and I will acknowledge all of the issues with it. Like, it is a very challenging narrative to follow because
It is.
we talk all the time how we don't like movies that spoon feed everything to you too easily. This movie could have given you a little more. Like, it's hard to follow. Like, especially if you want to keep up with the characters, you're never even sure who
It's
all
tough.
13 warriors are. You know about like 3 or 4 of them.
Never.
You kind of start to recognize, but it is, yeah, it's hard to follow. The action a lot of times is very dark and even hard to see what's happening.
It is.
Yeah, you never get to know names. Half the movie spoken in other languages as he's trying to learn it. Like it, so there's just a lot going on. Like it does
There's
not.
a slew of problems.
It doesn't feed you anything easy. And despite all of that, I still enjoy watching this movie.
I know. It is one of the most like I'm honestly surprised you don't hear more conversation about it just because it's like this weird stew of like disaster and like you said just it's really evident that this movie was chopped together. The narrative like you said is super duper hard to follow, but yet I'm in complete agreement with you. There's some good stuff in here.
Yeah, I think it just goes down to something very primitive that all guys love. Like I said, it kind of has that Conan the Barbarian feel, and we can talk about the Conan movies. Not great movies, but guys will love the Conan movies because there's something about this great like just sword battle action where you're thrown into like
Yes.
the chaos and fighting these almost monster-like people. Uh,
Hmm.
that the action isn't even like, again, as I'm watching it, I'm going, there's nothing particularly that great about the direction of the action in this movie. In fact, I would say they really needed some help with the choreography or something, so that was a little more
Yeah.
clear. And yet I'm going like, this is intense and awesome. Like I'm
Yeah.
totally in on it.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah.
It's one thing I kept thinking about when I was watching this week. It's like it's so hard to talk about anything with this movie because the dark cloud hanging over it is just all the problems it had. But it's like in some kind of perfect world, if it didn't have the problems that it had and all the production problems, part of me almost wondered if this movie wasn't just a little bit ahead of its time. And maybe if people, I was wondering if in 1999 we just weren't ready, for these big, and even like from an audience perspective and from a filmmaker perspective, where we hadn't quite mastered how to do these big, huge battle scenes quite yet.
100%. And
And
I still maintain, I think one of the reasons why we don't talk about this is a year later we have the Lord of the Rings come out. 2 years later, it's
hmm
Two Towers, and we have the Battle of Helm's Deep. That that
yeah,
from that
that kind of
from
feels like
that
the
point
turning
on,
point.
yeah, the scale of things grew so much. So when the 13th Warrior came out, I remember it feeling like the battles were huge, and then but
Hmm.
within 2 years, it feels really small, and it yeah, suddenly like everything's big. I talked about the
Hmm.
movie Troy. Troy took that same sort of lessons of like uh, Lord of the Rings, and they start doing the digital stuff where they can multiply all the boats you're seeing. So there's thousands of boats in the ocean approaching this beach, and all the battles are so much bigger. This was all very practical. You could tell for the most part.
You
They
can
had to have
tell,
people riding
yeah,
horses, so there's limited scope that you can ever see. And so at
yeah.
the time, it felt very
It's
big, and now it feels very small.
Yeah, and like you said, with Lord of the Rings stuff coming out just a year or two later, it almost immediately just, like I said, despite in even though it still had all the problems, but like if it didn't have all those problems, I think it would have been rendered kind of not useless, but just it would have gotten lost in the shuffle really, really quickly anyway, unfortunately. And I guess that's just the way it goes sometimes in Hollywood. These movies sometimes certain movies are just bad luck, as far as like when they came out and then what advancements are made in a short amount of time later. And this is one of the all-time examples of that, where just all of a sudden 2 years later, because of Peter Jackson and his innovation with Lord of the Rings, this movie just feels like it's just stuck in this weird in between where we weren't still in the 80s, where we just kept our fights and our battles very simple, but we weren't ready yet for the full out scale, that we would get shortly after that. So this movie, which it was going to fail anyway because of all the problems, but I think, like I said, if it didn't have those problems, it still gets rendered obsolete pretty quickly.
Bill Simmons has a thing on the rewatchables where he asks the question like, if this were could this be remade as like a Netflix series or as a movie or some TV show? And watching this, I'm going, this would be the like ideal mini series these days.
So
Of course, we've had plenty of shows
100%
that are
agree.
like Vikings and set in that sort of era that have had success. But you take this and you go, let's do 8 episodes that are an hour each. You actually get to spend some time with the 13 Warriors and kind of get to know who each
13
of them
Warriors.
are. And then you develop it, and each episode can be these different like action scenes or times that the enemy attacks. Which, by the way, just another nitpick, the enemy strategy doesn't really seem to make a whole lot of sense at any point in this movie. They do a lot of
No,
attacking and retreating for no reason. It's like, weren't you being totally
no.
effective in your attack? And it's okay. It's for the sake of the movie that they've got to like battle a little bit and then stop, battle a little bit and then stop. But
Yeah,
you know,
yeah. You're 1,000% correct. If this comes out today, it's a Amazon Prime or Apple TV or Netflix series, unquestionably, without a doubt.
and I would be 100% okay if they did that. I think
Yeah, I would
it's
too.
been like I said, 25 years, a failed project. I think this is the type of thing that you look at and you go, I see all the reasons it didn't work. I think we could do it again, and this time make it work and make it go.
Make it work. Yeah.
They could just call it Eaters of the Dead, which is what the book was called, which is not a great name. I think the 13th Warrior was definitely an upgrade in names. Even though it's a little confusing, you hear the name 13th Warrior and you're like, I don't know what that means. It sounds cool.
It does, but I'm going to tell you what. I actually kind of disagree with you on this
Mm.
one. I think they should have called this movie "Eaters of the Dead" because they didn't flush out the 13, like either commit to that and we need to know, like you said, I need to know who these 13 warriors are, or just abandon it.
Yeah.
And maybe that all got lost somewhere in all the mess and production of this movie, but I think at a certain point for the final cut they should have just abandoned the 13 warrior title. I think it's cool if they do a good job showing you the 13 warriors, but in the finished product that we get, I think they should have just gone with something else.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a fair criticism.
Just an opinion.
Yeah. I think Antonio Banderas is really good in this movie.
I agree. I think he's really good.
He's one of those guys that, I was thinking about it. I was like, a lot of movie stars, or even like past movie stars, we do a movie like this and we'd say, let's do a Mount Rushmore for them. And I was like, I'm not going to do a Mount Rushmore for Antonio Banderas because I can't even think of. I don't know if there's 4 movies I would want to put on the Mount Rushmore, which sounds weird to say because he's been an actor for so long, and I feel like he does a good job. But there's actually like very few movies that I would go to and say like, this is a really good Antonio Banderas movie.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, he's kind of funny. Like in some ways, it's like he is the ultimate like B movie star.
Yeah.
Not like the movies he did were B movies. He did these, he did like Zorro, and he had some of these big Hollywood movies, but he just never. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. To me, though, he never went into A level act. He's not in that Brad Pitt, Cruise, Hanks with all those guys. But it's like he became a very recognizable face. Like Desperado and some of these movies he did with Robert Rodriguez at the beginning had a lot of, like a strong, passionate fan base and stuff like that. But yeah, you're right. Like you asked me to do the Antonio Banderas Mount Rushmore, and it becomes a struggle pretty quick. But he's really good in this movie.
Yeah, I think part of it is he almost became like a parody of himself, in that like he's this really hot Latin guy, and even the way he talks became very spoofed, and his voice almost became more famous than he is. Of course, his voice has been most famously used as Puss in Boots in the Shrek world, which he does a really good job with. Actually,
he does a good job.
But I remember even SNL, making fun of Antonio Banderas, and everybody would just talk like Antonio Banderas, and I think that almost, like I said, it almost became a parody of himself,
kind of overshadowed him.
Yeah, and it's like it's not that he was a guy who just banked on this like goofy vocal delivery, but he did have a very distinct vocal style, almost like Walken or something, where and it sort of latched on before it latched on with Walken. Walken had like a great career, and then like after decades of success, people were like, he became more leaning into that Walkenism. Banderas from the beginning had that very distinct Antonio Banderas cadence that I think did him in.
But it's also one of those things where it's like I can't really think of a time where I'm like, man, Antonio Banderas was just bad in this movie.
Yeah.
Like he's very solid, very dependable guy. I wonder, I mean, I would like to, surely I would imagine like the actors, Banderas, all these people, they had to have known what a disaster this was while doing it, I would think.
I would guess so. And I know very small part in the movie, but Omar Sharif, he was in the beginning of the movie. He was kind of a bigger actor back in the day. I know he's like really bad mouthed his experience on this movie and basically said like, this is the movie where he said no more movies for paychecks.
Yeah. Well, and I was reading this week too, like he didn't, after this movie, he was like, I'm done. And he didn't do a movie for like several years after this. Like was not a good experience for people. And I guess it's an interesting point, like obviously what we try and talk about on here is movies we love and movies that where, things go right. But sometimes things just go wrong all the way through the process of making a movie. Like, let us not forget that it's, a big daunting challenge to make a movie, let alone some kind of big epic that, quite frankly, just not a lot of these big epics were being made in the 90s.
Yeah.
And so it feels in a lot of ways like just a ultimate, like we bit off way more than we could chew type of situation. And they just never recovered from it.
Yeah. One thing I think was surprising, I remember, at least it was surprising for me the first time I saw it, was this is a movie that very much depends on Antonio Banderas and his star power, whatever it was at the time. He is the main character of this movie, but he is not the hero of this movie. And it was kind of, you show up and you're like, like he really is just kind of like, he's the 13th warrior. I don't know. Everything I knew about movies up to this point as a, 15-year-old when this came out and I saw it, was that
Mhm.
he's going to be the hero, or even if he starts off not the hero, by the end he's going to be the guy who saves the day, and it never turns into
Mhm.
that. Like he definitely becomes part of
No,
the
it
group,
doesn't.
but then you realize after watching, like, oh, like Bolvi, the guy who was essentially the Beowulf character, the leader of the group, who's not the lead, is the hero of the movie. He's the guy who
Mhm.
does all the heroism, by the end, and
Yep.
uh, then
Yeah.
you realize like, oh, Antonio Banderas is the guy who's ended up, but in the end, he's the guy who's telling the story, and that's why it's all from his perspective as the
Right.
outsider doing it. And it's kind of like, in hindsight, I'm like, it's actually a very brave choice. I think it's really cool that
It
Antonio
is.
Banderas was like, yeah, I'll sign on to play the guy who's, you know, he is an interesting character because he's more of an academic, and then he's thrown into this
Mhm.
warrior culture, and he just kind of has to like adjust and survive. And it's a great little spiel that he gives at the end before their last battle. He does a prayer and he says, uh, "Merciful Father, I've squandered my days with plans of many things. This wasn't among them. But all I ask
Yeah.
now is that I live the next few minutes well." And it's like that's a great like character arc, just the realization
It's
like,
great. And that's what I mean when I say like there are good things in this movie. Like that is well done. And it's like that's kind of like I like that was a cool moment.
mhm,
Like so it's the whole movie is not some kind of miserable failure.
right.
So I like definitely want to be clear about that. Did you see this in the theater?
I did. I saw it in. We've talked about it before. The cheap theater, the theater that would have movies that
That's
have been
right.
out for a
That's
little
right.
while, and it's like
Yep.
$2. So I went and caught
I
it
couldn't
there.
remember.
I do. I'll never forget an experience. That movie is. There wasn't a whole lot of people in the movie with me. Just a dozen of us or so. But there was a
Yeah.
couple of ladies in the movie, and I say they're older. They're probably in their 40s or something like that. 15-year-old. They
Hmm.
felt older. Probably came
Yeah.
because they thought Antonio Banderas was this good-looking actor. And in the first like main action sequence, when a dude gets his head ripped off, they stand up and walk out of the movie.
Like nope, not for me.
Yeah. So
Like come on, ladies, what did you think you were getting yourself into?
yeah. Uh,
Yeah, I did not see this in the theater. And I was thinking this is a great thing about doing these 1999 movies. You kind of go back and you remember all these things. And this was kind of the opposite to me where it's like, man, I just don't really remember this movie coming out. Which, speaks to kind of what happened to this movie because I have a pretty good movie memory.
mhm.
And even movies that I don't love, I still can remember kind of like I remember them coming out. I remember reading about their box office, and this poor movie just got completely wiped out, and pushed off to the side from the get go. So I just don't have a lot of memory of this movie, and I did not see it in the theater.
Yeah. So I do want to run through just a couple of the positives about it because I knew we were going to spend a good amount of time talking
Yeah,
about the
we
negatives.
right, right. We should talk about positives.
It's got a surprising amount of humor in it. The first
It
instance
does.
being at the when they're at the encampment at the beginning and they're passing around the bowl of water in the morning and they're all taking turns drinking and spitting back into it. And the one guy's like blowing his nose into it, and when they hand it to Antonio Banderas, just the look of disgust on his face as he pushes it away. That's a good
Yeah,
laugh.
that worked. That worked.
Um, there's several other good instances of comedy, but there's it's a great bit the bit where they do the one-on-one duel with
Yes.
the king's son's henchmen because the king's son is
Hmm.
corrupt and he's worried about a power struggle with them, and so they pick a fight with this big guy and go through all this deception where he's letting them just dominate him during the fight, and then he kills them like that, just to show like
Yeah.
you can't calculate our strength because our strength is how skilled we are. So you can measure
Yep.
like how big and strong we are. But that's a great moment. Um,
I agree completely.
like I said, a lot of the action set pieces, even though the choreography wasn't necessarily like anything standoutish, I thought were really fun and enjoyable. The first like night raid with the fire was incredible. I do like the fact that even though you don't really get to track these 13 warriors very well, like the way that they die throughout every battle really lent a sense of like anybody can die at any time tension that a lot of movies don't
Hmm.
have. And they wouldn't always do it in like really like exciting ways. It wasn't like, oh, it's coming right now. It would happen really fast. Like, yep, he's dead now. Um,
Yep.
and then that final battle is just so cool. Like I said, he does the prayer,
It's really
but then when
cool.
they all recite the like Viking sacrifice, that lo there do I see my father, and they start doing that all together, and it's raining and
That's
the enemies
cool.
charging. I'm like, when I saw that, I was like, I don't think I've ever felt like anything was more cool in my entire life. Like, I want to be one of those guys on that battlefield, like who's like, I'm ready to meet death, bring it on, as a charging army comes at you.
That stuff worked really, really well. It really did. To me, the most positive thing I have to say about this rewatching it is just like kind of like you're saying, like, you know, some of the fight scenes, like, you know, maybe not the A plus choreography and all that, but there's just, and I guess this is the benefit of going back and watching old movies. You know, it's like I loved watching, you know, them try and take on these big battle scenes, and just thinking like back to 1999, there was CGI, but we hadn't perfected it like we talked about. So just, you know, I did have an admiration for them trying to film these, even if it wasn't always a success. I appreciated the swing they took,
Yeah.
and so that stuff worked for me.
Yeah, it all felt very real. Like you could tell there was a lot of
They
practical. So in that nighttime battle with the fire, it ends where uh, the bad guys are riding through kind of a narrow passage as they've broken into the town, and some of the warriors get together and they throw him a long pole with a sharpened end, and he says, "What do I do with it?" And they say, "Put your foot on it and stand. We're going to stand here and let the horses charge at us." And that like it
Mhm.
it felt very intense, very
That
real
stuff's
as these
cool.
people are charging, and you just got to hold, and it's like a courage moment. You know, are you going to fold and run or drop it, or are you going to stand your ground while they charge? Yeah, that's
That
the
stuff
stuff that
works.
works.
So yeah, it's not, you know, like we, and I was kind of the same as you. Is like I knew we would have to just spend a lot of time talking about all the mess and the chaos surrounding this movie, but I definitely don't want to give the impression it's just a all in all, you know, just a complete failure, because it's not.
No, to me, it's a movie that like if I were to ever teach a class on filmmaking, it would have to be in like the rotation of films we study to be like, okay, class, let's break it down. What went wrong? What went right? You know, like
What
there's
went
just
wrong? What? Yeah,
it's
yeah,
a
yeah.
fascinating movie to study.
It really is. It really is. And you know, it's just unfortunate for this movie. Like the stuff that went wrong, it's very clear. Like it's very much just up there on the screen, and like you said, just the choppiness and the, you could tell it was a movie where it was like that didn't work, so we got to, yeah, you can tell all of that, unfortunately, but doesn't mean it's all bad either.
Yeah. Um, so this one is one that I've got to say, like I've seen, like, I've never seen Go. That was the first time watch for me. This was probably my 10th watch of the 13th Warrior over the years. One
Hmm.
fond memory I do have for this movie, not associated with the movie itself, is uh, back in the day when I bought a DVD player, which I talked about before. Like I bought it when they were first
Yeah,
coming out. It was pretty expensive. The first two DVDs that I bought them together, were Saving Private Ryan and the 13th Warrior. Those are my first two DVDs that I bought.
really
Uh,
good
I
choices.
think they cost me like $25 each, which but I don't know what
Yeah,
it was at the time. It was like serious movies, actions or dramas were $25, comedies were $20. That's just whatever reason that's what the
right.
price of DVDs were. And so yeah, when I got
I
those
know
two,
it's weird.
those two movies, but just I have that very distinct feeling, that memory of buying those two DVDs and going home and opening them up and like putting the disc in and all of that. So that
I
positive
love
association is
I
with
love
this
memories like
movie.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so two movies that I really enjoyed sitting down and watching this weekend.
Same. I did too, and I was kind of the opposite of you. I'd seen Go way more times, even though I hadn't seen it in probably 15 years. I've seen Go way more times than I've seen 13th Warrior. So I had a really good time watching both of these movies, even you know, with both of them, quite frankly, having flaws, but it was still really fun to go back and watch them.
Yeah, both really good time capsule movies too.
Definitely. It's crazy to you look back, and I saw like I always like to look at like the posters for movies. It's like the poster for 13th Warrior where it's like from the author of Jurassic Park and the director of Die Hard.
Yeah,
And you just see that and you're like, dang, like that's a stacked lineup right there. And just it just didn't work, man. This movie, just like we said, it was just doomed.
yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah, when you get to brag on those things, author
Yeah,
of Jurassic Park, director of Die Hard, starring Antonio Banderas, who again at the time was not
I
top
know.
shelf star, but pretty well known
But he was a
star.
name.
Yeah,
He was a name for sure.
yeah, just
It's wild.
really wild. Probably didn't help that the critics just trashed it.
Man, you're right. Like you said, that what was it, 33%?
33%.
That's brutal. Like
Yeah,
that's brutal.
I like if they would have given it even like a 60%, I'd be like, I understand. But
Right.
30
I'm not saying it should have been
33
not.
is like that's
That's bad.
that's really bad.
That's bad.
Yeah, there's a
Yeah, people just didn't want to like this movie.
no. And I really, what, we talked about it, how it could be remade as a miniseries. I actually like, I really want that to happen at this point. Like,
Hmm.
Amazon, Netflix, somebody get on this, Apple TV. Like, this is there's a good story here that could
Well,
be a
it's like we
lot of
talked
fun to
about last
tell.
week. It's like we talked about last week. Netflix has no problem churning out these just stupid action movies that are awful. Like try this. Try to tackle something like this, Vikings and battle and that kind of stuff instead of, some terrible crappy action movie that like you said, algorithm movie.
Yeah. Well, we've got a couple weeks before we return to big releases that we'll be excited to talk about on here. We're 2 weeks away, basically,
hmm
from Twisters, which I'm really excited about.
I'm really excited, but I have a movie coming out this week that I'm really excited
Long
about.
Legs.
Long Legs.
Yeah.
I am super excited.
It's from what I hear, it's a pretty scary movie.
Yeah, it's wild. I have seen the previews because I've seen a lot of horror movies in the theater this year, so I have high hopes. I don't know how willing you are to talk about it, or if you want to see it, because I know it's not up your alley. But
You know what? I would do that for you, Andy. I'll go see Long Legs, and we can talk about that next week.
Nice, unless you had a different idea.
I did not have a different idea. I've got written down like in my notes. I've kind of mapped out this month, and I had like very clear ideas for most weeks, like Twisters 2 weeks from now, Deadpool and Wolverine after that. But this week, I've got like in a lighter color the two big movies coming out are Fly Me to the Moon and Long Legs. So I was like, we'll see. But I'm not surprised Long Legs is a type of movie. You're the demographic for Long Legs, and so we'll tackle that one.
I can't wait. I'm super excited. I have high expectations. It looks so weird and so creepy. And our guy Nick Cage back in the saddle again. And
Yeah.
I've been very careful to not stumble across any kind of spoilers or anything, but the little snippets I have read say he's incredible in this movie. So maybe it'll be a reminder that Nicolas Cage is a good actor and not the butt of a joke.
Yeah. And I will say, I will see the movie Fly Me to the Moon. I don't have very high expectations for that one.
No, and I like Channing Tatum. I like Scarlett Johansson, but yeah, I don't know.
And I'm all
I
for
guess
the moon landing was faked movie. That's
I am too, and it doesn't like I've seen the trailer for it. I actually just saw it. I went to the movies Friday night and just saw this trailer, and it's like you know what, it looks fine. It's pretty lighthearted. It looks like, and that's fine.
Yeah. But
can I just say something real quick that has nothing to do with anything we've been talking about?
Absolutely.
I just want to shout out the movie going world because I went to see Jaws this week. When did we record this week? Was it like Tuesday or Wednesday, right?
Yeah.
Because I think it was Tuesday. So on Wednesday night, I saw Jaws. There were I bet you there were almost 50 people in that theater.
That's fantastic.
And let me tell you, I was thrilled. I was thrilled to see that many people there. They laughed, they screamed, they applauded, they did all the things. It was an amazing movie going experience for me, even though I've seen Jaws 12 billion times.
It never gets old.
It never gets old. That is that will I'm just going to go ahead and say that will forever be my favorite movie.
Yeah.
When we did a Jaws episode and I said on there, I think this will always be my favorite movie. I know this will always be my favorite movie.
Hey, I mean, if nothing has been, if it hasn't become dated at this point or anything, it's not going to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It was just a great experience, and the crowd was, respectful, and nobody was on their phone or getting up and down. It was awesome.
That's incredible. That's the way it should be.
Yeah, it's the way it should be. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us for this week's discussion.
Yes.
We're going back to 1999 with us.
Always fun to be in 1999.
Absolutely. Yeah. And next week, Long Legs. Week after that, Twisters. Week after that, Deadpool and Wolverine. So we've got some good stuff, I think, coming
up. Got a good
up.
July.
Yeah, good slate.
Absolutely.
And then I'm just gonna throw this out there. I don't really know if we'll do anything for it, but the 17th, 10 days from now, is the 1-year anniversary of the pod launching. So
that's crazy that it's been a year.
Yeah. So we might have to do, I don't know, we'll have to come up with something fun to do to celebrate the fact that it will be a year of the pod.
I can't believe it. What a fun year.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us, and we will see you guys again next week.
See you next week.